Hi there, and welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Michael. I work as a data scientist, and in this analysis project series that I've been covering, we've been addressing the question Africa, are the Cardinals falling? Just in case you're joining us at this point, the cardinal here is a coined to refer to the dominant nation in a region. In order to do this analysis, I divided the analysis into groups of five referring to the regions per the UNGO scheme. So the UNGO scheme divides Africa into five regions: Central Africa, East Africa, South Africa, West Africa, and now you have found us in chapter 5, which covers North Africa as the final region for this analysis project. And so ideally, what I have been aiming to achieve is to single out the top two nations across each of the regions. And the way I do this is by comparing uh, the nations and how they've been performing on various economic metrics, just to identify who is the cardinal, here the top nation, and who is the silent contender, the number two nation. The number two nation, because we're trying to see if a cardinal is falling, it means they're losing their number one position, in which case a silent contender will usurp and take over that position. And so that's what this analysis project has been about. It's been quite a journey, but now we're at the final stage to cover Northern Africa. And so let's see what insights we can cover from this. Now, an overview of what to expect is we're going to just look at the nations in this region. Then we're going to go through the various metrics. So first, it'll just be a high level look at the population, just because the human capital is heavily involved in driving the economic results of each region, as you can imagine. And then now we'll address the various economic metrics here. So GDP, real GDP growth rate, inflation, and the USD forex rate. And then finally, we'll summarize the insights that we've gotten into a comparison between the cardinal and the silent contender across the various metrics that we've looked at, just to see which cases reveal a falling cardinal and which cases reveal a stable cardinal. Now, to start, we have the Northern African countries, and shout out to World Atlas for this really good map. And so for Northern Africa, we've got Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and Sudan. So you can see these are six nations, as you can see here, and it's one of the smaller regions. This one ends Southern Africa, sorry. It's one of the smaller regions here. Now, after, so you can keep this in mind as we move forward. And so to start, we'll look at the region's population. So given the six nations that we've covered and looking at the number of people as of end of last year, you can see that Egypt has the highest population with a tune of 106 million, after which you've got Sudan with a population of 48 million. That's around 20%. You've also got Algeria close behind with 46 million, that's around 18%, and so on and so forth, all the way until Libya, who have the smallest population with 7 million Africans. Now, here, of course, the top two that we'll isolate is Egypt and Sudan. Next up, we also looked at the trend of the population from our analysis period, that is 2013 to 2023. And just by observing this increasing trend, which was also reflected in each of the individual nations, we saw that cumulatively each year there's been an increase of 5 million people. So if last year was at 256, we probably expect that it'll be 261 million people by the end of 2024, give or take. And now we start looking at the economic metrics just for the purposes of our comparison and to answer our question. So we're looking at the total GDP, and here that's the nominal GDP. We can see by end of last year, Northern Africa generated a total of $886.88 billion. This is one of the highest in Africa. Um, you can see that Egypt accounted for around 45% of this, so that's close to half. And then after it was Algeria with around 25%, so that's a quarter. And then now the other nations covered the rest. So the top two in this case will be Egypt and Algeria. Then, still under nominal GDP, we also looked at the trend. So you can see there was kind of a plateau, not a plateau, sorry, a valley in a sense. So if you consider the period 2013 to 2017 for nominal GDP, you can see a decreasing trend from for that. And then there was a slight bump in 2014. And then in 2018 to 2022, there was a steady increasing trend. But then 2023, there was a decline compared to the year before that. And so there's just those dynamics to observe. And then when you consider the real GDP growth rate, in 2020, it went to as low as negative 6.2%. So in the previous video, we looked at West Africa. West Africa, we identified is the only region in Africa that didn't have a negative drop here in 2020. For West Africa, it was 1%, but for all other regions in Africa, they went below zero, as we observed. Moving on, we now focus on the top two nations here, and as we observed on the proportion analysis for the GDP of 2023, we can see that the cardinal here is Egypt, just because, like we saw, it accounts for around half of the GDP of the region, and then Algeria is a quarter. Now, across board, Egypt has been the clear-cut cardinal, and then you can see that it's also been a bit variable. So it was increasing between 2013 2016, and then from 2018 till 2022. But then we saw here that dip. So you can see this dip from 2022 to 2023. We can say this is what drove the overall dip that we observed for the whole region earlier. Because if you compare that with Algeria, Algeria has just been going up steadily from 2020 after some changes before that. So, as much as Algeria is on the uptrend and is the silent contender in this case, we can see that just because of the difference in magnitude, it's highly unlikely that it will catch up to Egypt anytime soon, unless, of course, Egypt continues declining and Algeria remains consistent with its increases, in which case they'll cross at some point and that will change. But if we're looking at it in the next 1 to 2 years, probably not. So Egypt might remain the cardinal in this case. Then, if you consider the real GDP growth, again, you've got Egypt as the cardinal for some time, and then you've also got Algeria. But now, if you consider real GDP, you'll realize that even though Egypt has been the clear-cut cardinal here, just because of its variability and the fact that it's dropping while Algeria is on the increase, you can see that there's not a very big difference. And so you can imagine if this continues into 2024, by the end of this year, we might see a case where Algeria goes up and Egypt goes down, in which case now the silent contender that is Algeria will usurp Egypt on the real GDP growth front. Then we consider inflation for the whole period. I must say that even though this chart is plotting the median inflation rate for the whole region, this is one of the regions that's had generally higher inflation rates than other regions. Also, one thing to note is that the inflation rate here is CPI inflation, Consumer Price Index. And so, with that said, you can see we had a period of rising inflation between 2013 and 2017 for Northern Africa. And then after that, it dropped dramatically till 2020, and then it started steadily rising again until 2022 at 9.7. Of course, this hasn't really peaked to the previous peak in 2017, and then now it eased again by end of 2023. Now, for 2022, the reason we say it's dramatic is because you can see from 4 to 9 it's quite significant. At least for here, it was just steadily going. So 3, 1, 3, 5. But now here it's 1 and then 4 all of a sudden. So there's just these things to note. And if you consider 2022, because this is now not too long ago, if you drill down on this to focus on which nations had the highest inflation in 2022, uh, Sudan had 87% inflation, Tunisia 10.1%, Algeria 9.3%, and Morocco 8.3%. So you can see, I can't imagine the kind of cost of standard of living in Sudan with an inflation rate of 87% because that's obnoxiously high. And then you've got these other nations here. So these are the nations that really contributed to what you observed here in 2022. And then, of course, 2023, the rate reduced. So, I mean, it would be, of course, beneficial to Northern Africa if this continued into 2024. Then, focusing on the top two here, the top two naturally are the nations with the lowest inflation rate. And because of this, the y axis for this chart here has been inverted because the lower the better. Now, the cardinal here has been Morocco, and then the silent contender has been Algeria. So earlier on, that is pre 2020 and before, Morocco was well above Algeria, meaning that it had a lower rate compared to what Algeria had. And also the swings that Algeria experienced were really high. So you can see they had high inflation here in 2016, and then there's also high inflation in 2021. But pre 2020, you could see that. But then after that, Morocco's inflation started increasing rapidly, as with the case of Algeria. And now, because of this, one thing I did was to look at the standard deviation of the inflation rates year on year just to see who had more variability. And we can see here that Morocco's standard deviation was lower than that of Algeria, meaning that Algeria is more variable. Algeria's inflation rate was more variable. Now, additionally, you can see that now they're moving in a similar direction here, but not just because of the difference in magnitude. Like for instance, you see in 2022, they kind of approached each other. There's a 1% difference between the two. But even though now they've said reducing in inflation, you can see Algeria's was slower than Morocco. So Morocco dropped to 4 from 8.3, but Algeria dropped to 8 only 8. So this is a slow reduction compared to what happened in Morocco. In which case, Morocco here will retain its cardinal status, and Algeria will continue to be the silent contender until at some point where it has a dramatic reduction in its inflation. Then we move on to the USD forex rate trend, and you can see here that we have an interesting switcheroo happening. So in the period 2013 to 2020, Libya had the strongest currency relative to the dollar in Northern Africa, and then the silent contender was Tunisia. But then after 2020, something happened, and Libya's rate lost to up until around 4.5. And so after that, Tunisia, who had just regularly continued with its trend here, usurped Libya because of this. And so after this, we now see that Tunisia now became the cardinal and Libya became the silent contender. Now, based on this, we can see that both currencies have been losing their strength versus the dollar in a similar direction, and they don't seem that there's going to be any sort of convergence happening anytime soon. And so, because of this, Libya now, as the silent contender, is not adequately positioned to usurp Tunisia in the short term, which means that Tunisia will remain the cardinal for quite some time. And you can see that here when we now just restrict our trend to 2024 alone. Tunisia has a rate here terminating end of Q1 2024 at 3.13 vis-a-vis Libya's of 4.83. So Tunisia's currency is doing better because if we go back 1 second, please. Yeah, you can see you could just infer it from here. It's just that now we've drilled down further. So Tunisia's currency remains to be the strongest in this region, and so this looks like it will continue for some time. And then finally, for the USD forex rate, we looked at the trend of stability as well. So here, stability or instability was determined by computing the standard deviation here. That's what I've called the forex sigma. And of course, the lower the better. So you can see uh, Tunisia's FX rate, Tunisia's currency has been relatively stable compared to that of Morocco. So the magnitude of the swings Morocco has experienced have been higher for its currency than Tunisia's currency, which means now, for example, from 2019 especially, Tunisia has been the cardinal, and this doesn't look like it's going to change. Just because, again, with high variability, you don't know if it's going to swing downwards, and it's going to swing downwards in a big way again. And here we're specifically referring to Morocco, as opposed to Tunisia. Tunisia is starting to stabilize even more, and its variability is reducing, given that you can see by end of Q1 2024, the sigma was 0.02 relative to Morocco 0.06. And so now, as we conclude this, we can now go through the various metrics just to summarize what we've discovered from Northern Africa. From a population perspective, Egypt is the cardinal with Sudan as a silent contender, but because of the difference in size, you can say that we don't have an indication of a falling cardinal. We move on to GDP. Egypt had a higher nominal GDP compared to Algeria, but when you focus on the trends and what we observed, we can see that yes, we have a case of a falling cardinal here because of how Egypt is falling, and then Algeria is on the uprise. Then you've got real GDP growth rate. So you've got Egypt as the cardinal and Algeria as a silent contender. And we also observed that because of the potential switch that will happen into 2024, we do have a case of a falling cardinal here. When we move to inflation, CPI, you can see we saw that Morocco was our cardinal and then Algeria as a silent contender, but we established that uh, Morocco is stable in its position as the cardinal if we're focusing on specifically inflation. Then, focusing on the USD forex rate across board, Tunisia was a cardinal at every level. If you're looking at the whole trend, Libya was the number two nation based on its currency, but just because of the difference in magnitude, you could say Tunisia is stable enough. Tunisia's currency is stable enough in the region to remain the cardinal here. And on the perspective of stability, we saw that Morocco's currency was number two to Tunisia's currency, but Morocco has that high variability that we've observed, and so because of this, we'll see that Tunisia will still remain as a cardinal unless something really dramatic happens. Now, a key thing to note is that Algeria, Libya, and Tunisia have elections this year, and so because of this, we need to also observe this further into 2025 just to see do these insights do the predictions remain the same, or will things change over time? Because again, you can imagine elections might have or might involve change in regimes, and also they might influence the existing agreements, both bilateral, multilateral, and local, that have impacted the current economic positions in these nations. So that's something that could change what we've uncovered here. And so with that, we have completed rather the analysis project Africa and the Cardinals falling. Thank you so much for your time, your attention, your engagement, and I hope that again, if you have any new insights you'd like to share with me based on what you've seen here, any questions, recommendations, or comments, I welcome those very much. And I hope that this will also inspire you, encourage you to work on something interesting to do with Africa. And if you're willing to share, feel free to comment with what you've analyzed or what you've come across in the comment section, just so that I can also learn from what you're doing or what you've also learned from other people. Thank you very much again. My name is Michael. It's been a pleasure.